Prologue: The Matthews Lights Ceremony. December 1st, 1969. The old Victorian house on Maple Street stood silent in the early December twilight, its windows glowing with the warm promise of home. Inside, 22-year-old Eleanor Matthews carefully arranged 4 hand-dipped beeswax candles on the antique mahogany table, each one crafted with loving precision according to her grandmother's recipe. "Are you sure about starting this tradition now?" George Matthews asked, his strong carpenter's hands gentle as he helped position the brass holders. "The baby's not due until spring." Eleanor smoothed her hand over her growing belly, feeling their first child stir. "Mum always said traditions begin before they're needed, just like love." She opened the leather-bound book George had made her, its golden pages still blank, waiting for the stories of Christmases to come. The first candle stood tallest. "Hope," Eleanor whispered, striking the match. The flame caught, steady and bright, just as her grandmother had taught her. "This is for those who came before us, who kept faith through the hard times." Her voice carried the lilt of remembered prayers. The second candle. "Peace," George said, his voice rough with emotion as Eleanor lit it. "For the present moment, and the family we're building." His hand found hers, warm and sure. The third. "Joy," they spoke together, watching the flame dance. "For the children who will fill these rooms." Eleanor's free hand rested on her belly again. The fourth candle remained unlit. "Love," Eleanor explained, touching its smooth surface. "This one waits for Christmas Eve, when the circle of family is complete." George opened the golden book to its first page. "Tell me again how we'll use this. Each Christmas we'll write our memories, our hopes, our family's story. When our children are grown, they'll add their own pages, and their children after them." Eleanor's eyes shone in the candlelight. "Mum said the Matthews family started in America with nothing but faith and craftsman's skills. These candles we'll make each year, this book you've bound. They're our way of passing on not just things but meaning." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the windowsills with white. Eleanor recorded that evening's ceremony in careful script, beginning a chronicle that would span generations. She couldn't know then how this simple ritual would anchor her family through joys and sorrows, or how, 54 years later, it would become the key to bringing her children home one last time. "Look," George whispered, drawing her attention to the window. Through the swirling snow, a cardinal had landed on the sill, its red feathers bright against the gathering dark. Eleanor smiled, remembering her mother's words. A cardinal in winter was a reminder that the most precious gifts often came dressed in hope. As they closed the golden book that night, Eleanor whispered a prayer learned from her grandmother. "Lord, let this light guide our family home, through all the Christmases to come." She couldn't have known how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how desperately she would cling to them in her darkest hour. December 1st, 2023. Eleanor Matthews' arthritic fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the well-worn brass candle holder from its resting place in the cherry wood cabinet. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through the Victorian windows, catching on the delicate engravings George had carved into the holder 54 years ago. 4 empty spaces waited on the mahogany table, each marked with a faded gold plate. "Hope, peace, joy, love. First things first," she murmured to herself, the way she had every December 1st since 1969. The basement workroom waited, its familiar scent of beeswax and memories unchanged by time. Each step down was measured, careful. At 77, Eleanor knew better than to rush, especially with the dizzy spells becoming more frequent. The workroom remained exactly as George had left it. His tools hung in perfect order on the pegboard wall, the wood lathe stood ready for projects that would never come, and in the corner, the old copper pot waited for its annual purpose. Eleanor touched the wallet-sized photo taped to the pot's handle. George teaching 7-year-old Michael how to dip his first candle, their son's face scrunched in concentration. She gathered her supplies with practiced motions. Local beeswax from Henderson's apiary. Though Tom Henderson had long since passed, his grandson still reserved her yearly portion. Cotton wicking from the same supplier in Vermont they'd always used. And the essential oils George had sworn made Matthews' candles special: cedar, frankincense and pine. The process was meditation, muscle memory born of 54 years. Melt the wax slowly. Add the oils drop by drop. Prepare the wicks with prayers for each family member. Eleanor's hands moved steadily through the familiar ritual, even as her mind wandered to the doctor's office 3 months ago, to words like advanced and aggressive and months to live. The phone rang upstairs. Michael's ringtone, Silent Night, played on piano the way Sarah used to practice it. Eleanor checked the wax temperature and hurried up the stairs, her heart lifting. Michael always came for the first light ceremony. "Mum?" His voice carried the artificial cheer she'd grown to dread. "About Christmas." Eleanor steadied herself against the kitchen counter, eyes fixing on the calendar where she'd marked her children's arrival dates in careful script. "Yes, dear. Jenkins and Blackwood is finalizing a huge merger. They need me to stay in Seattle through the holidays. I tried to get out of it, but..." Paper shuffled in the background. "The bonus will help set up that college fund for Tommy." Eleanor thought of her grandson, who she'd only seen in FaceTime calls since last Christmas. "Of course, dear. Tommy's education is important." Her voice remained warm, practiced. "Will Sarah and David still?" "Actually." Michael cleared his throat. "Sarah mentioned something about hospital scheduling, and David has a conference? You should call them." The wax would be reaching temperature. "I should check on something in the basement," Eleanor said softly. "Give Tommy a kiss for me." "Love you, Mum. I'll make it up to you in January, promise." The line went dead before Eleanor could respond. She stood for a moment, stringed to steady her breathing, then made her way carefully back downstairs. The wax had reached the perfect temperature, just as it always did. Eleanor began dipping the first wick, building layers of hope with each slow descent into the warm wax. Her grandmother had taught her mother had taught her, and she had taught her children. Though somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten the importance of traditions that couldn't be rushed. "The first candle is hope," she whispered to the empty room, her voice carrying the same lilt it had 54 years ago. "Because without hope, we cannot begin." Another layer. Hope carried the first Matthews across the ocean. Another. Hope built this home. Another. Hope brings children back to their mothers. The last words caught in her throat. Upstairs, the Golden Book waited for this year's entry, its pages chronicling every first light ceremony since 1969. Eleanor wondered what she would write this year, how she would record this day without letting the ink run with tears. The candle grew slowly between her hands, taking shape the way it always had. Perfect or flawed, it would still burn, still light the way. Eleanor had learned that from her mother, who had kept the ceremony even during the Depression, even after Eleanor's father was lost in the war. "Light pushes back darkness," she'd said, "even if your hands shake while making the candle." When the first candle was done, Eleanor held it up to the workshop's single window. The December sun caught its layers, revealing subtle imperfections that spoke of human hands and human hearts. Like the Matthews family itself, imperfect, yet still able to carry light. She placed the finished candle in its holder, ready for tonight's private ceremony. For the first time in 54 years, she would light the hope candle alone. The thought settled heavily in her chest, next to the constant ache that the doctor said would only grow worse. "Well," Eleanor said to the workshop full of memories, "we begin with hope, even when it's all we have." She touched the candle's smooth surface, adding silently in her heart, "Even if it's our last beginning." Upstairs, the grandfather clock George had restored in 1975 began to chime 3 o'clock. Time to start the other candles. Eleanor squared her shoulders and reached for more wax. The ceremony wouldn't be the same without her children, but it would go on. Some traditions were stronger than absence, more enduring than disappointment, and perhaps, she thought as she began preparing the second candle, hope wasn't such a small thing after all. Even the smallest flame could light the way home. December 1st, 2023 evening. The hope candle cast gentle shadows across the pages of the Golden Book as Eleanor settled into George's old leather chair. The familiar scent of leather and beeswax wrapped around her like a comfort from simpler days. She ran her fingers over the book's worn cover, tracing the words George had tooled into the leather. Matthews Family Christmas Memories, SD 1969. Opening to this year's blank page, Eleanor uncapped her fountain pen, the same one she'd used for every entry since the beginning. The paper welcomed the ink as she wrote the date in her careful script. December 1st, 2023, the first light ceremony. She paused, the pen hovering over the creamy page. In 54 years of chronicles, she'd never struggled to find the words. Each year's entry had flowed naturally, filled with the joy and chaos of family gatherings, the laughter of children, the warmth of traditions shared. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising the season's first snow. Eleanor glanced at the family photos lining the mantel, their subjects caught in eternal moments of Christmas past. Michael at 7, proudly holding his first handmade candle. Sarah at 12, performing Silent Night at the church Christmas pageant. David at 10, helping his father select the perfect Christmas tree. The phone rang, startling her. Sarah's ringtone, "Oh Holy Night" played on the music box her daughter had given her years ago. Eleanor's heart lifted, then immediately steeled itself against hope. "Mum?" Sarah's voice carried the same forced brightness Michael's had. "I've been trying to reach you all day. I was in the workshop, dear, making the candles." A pause. "Oh, Mum, I forgot that was today." The sound of hospital announcements echoed in the background. "Listen, about Christmas." Eleanor's pen pressed against the paper, leaving a small dark stain. "Michael called earlier. He won't be able to make it." "That's actually why I'm calling." Sarah's voice took on the professional tone she used with difficult patients. "The hospital's short-staffed, and as the newest attending, I need to cover the holiday shifts. I tried to switch, but, of course, dear." Eleanor watched the ink stain spread on the golden page. "The patients need you. I'll make it up to you in January, I promise. Maybe we can do a late Christmas celebration." After the treatments began, after the hair loss, after the pain medications. "That would be lovely," Eleanor said softly. "I have to run, emergency coming in. Love you, Mum." The line went dead. Eleanor looked down at the book, at the growing stain on the pristine page. 54 years of memories, and now she had to write about a Christmas marked by absence. She began to write anyway, her script as steady as she could make it. "This year the hope candle burns alone, but it burns still. Its light reaches out across the miles to Seattle, to Los Angeles, to wherever my children's paths have led them." Thunder cracked closer now, and the first snowflakes began to dance past the window. Eleanor wrote about the candle making, about the perfect temperature of the wax, about the way the light caught the layers. She wrote about hope, though her heart ached with its weight. A gust of wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the scent of coming snow. Eleanor thought of other difficult entries in the Golden Book: the Christmas after George's death, the year Michael missed his first ceremony, the gradual emptying of the house. Each time, she'd found words to bridge the gap between what was and what should have been. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the front window's lace curtains, she could see small Annie Thompson from next door, her bright red coat a splash of color against the gathering dark. Eleanor closed the Golden Book, leaving the entry unfinished. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important parts of a story weren't in what was written, but in what happened next. Eleanor opened the heavy oak door to find 8-year-old Annie shivering on the porch, snowflakes melting in her dark curls. Behind her, the Thompsons' house stood dark. Unusual for this time of evening. "Mrs. Matthews?" Annie clutched a crumpled envelope. "Mom got called to the hospital for an emergency, and Mrs. Peterson, who usually watches me, had to leave because her sister got sick and—" The words tumbled out in a rush. "Mom said to give you this." Eleanor ushered the child inside, out of the growing storm. The envelope contained a hastily scrawled note. "Eleanor, medical emergency at the pediatric ward. Could Annie stay with you for a few hours? She's had dinner. Lisa." "Of course you can stay, dear." Eleanor helped Annie out of her coat, noting how the girl's eyes were drawn to the hope candle's flame. "Have you ever seen a hand-dipped beeswax candle before?" Annie shook her head, moving closer to the Golden Book still open on the side table. "What's that?" "That's our family's Christmas memory book." Eleanor settled back into George's chair, patting the space beside her. "Would you like to see some of the stories?" Annie climbed up, careful not to touch the book without permission. "Is it very old?" "It's exactly 54 years old." Eleanor turned to the first page, where her younger self had chronicled that first ceremony. "My husband George made it the year we were expecting our first baby." "The pictures are so yellow," Annie observed, touching the edge of a faded photograph showing a much younger Eleanor dipping candles. "That's because memories get more golden with time." Eleanor turned the pages slowly. "Here's the Christmas when Michael, that's my oldest, learned to make his first candle. He was just about your age." As the snow fell heavier outside, Eleanor found herself sharing stories she hadn't revisited in years. Annie proved to be an attentive audience, asking questions about each tradition, each photograph, each carefully preserved memory. They reached the entry from Christmas, 1992. "This was Sarah's first piano recital at the Christmas Eve service," Eleanor explained, showing Annie a program pressed between the pages. "She played Silent Night." "My mum says you used to teach Sunday school," Annie said, studying a photograph of children around a Christmas pageant manger. "Before you retired." 37 years, Eleanor nodded. "I taught your mother when she was little." Thunder crashed closer, making Annie jump. The lights flickered ominously. "Perhaps we should get some emergency supplies ready," Eleanor suggested, closing the Golden Book. "I know where George kept the flashlights and extra batteries." As they gathered supplies from the kitchen, Annie spotted the remaining unfinished candles in the workshop doorway. "Are you going to make more?" Eleanor paused, considering. The tradition called for making all 4 candles on December 1st, but perhaps… Would you like to learn how? Annie's eyes lit up. Really? Mum says you're the only one who still knows how to make candles the old way. The very old way, Eleanor smiled, taking the handrail. My grandmother taught my mother, who taught me. Come, I'll show you how we heat the wax to just the right temperature. The storm grew stronger outside, but in the basement workshop, time seemed to slow to the rhythm of dipping wax and sharing stories. Eleanor found herself telling Annie about the symbology of each layer, the prayers woven into the wicking, the way patience created something that would bring light to others. Upstairs, the golden book waited, its newest entry still unfinished. But perhaps, Eleanor thought as she guided Annie's small hands through the candle-making process, this year's story was still being written, in ways she hadn't expected. December 1st, 2023 night. The storm intensified as Eleanor guided Annie up from the workshop, their newly made peace candle cooling on its stand below. In the living room, the antique mantel clock struck 7, its chimes nearly drowned by thunder. Mum's running late, Annie said, peering through lace curtains at the swirling snow. The streets of Salem had disappeared under a thick white blanket. Eleanor's attention fixed on the oak chest in the corner, the one George had crafted specifically for the Matthews family nativity. While we wait, would you help me with something very special? She retrieved the chest's key from its ribbon around her neck. The lock turned with a familiar click, releasing the scent of cedar and memories. Annie gasped at the tissue-wrapped figures nestled inside. Your father made these? She asked, watching Eleanor gently unwrap each piece. Over many years, Eleanor lifted out Mary first, her wooden face serene despite the crude marks of George's early woodcarving attempts. He started the year we married. Mary was his first piece. Thunder rattled the windows as Eleanor's phone buzzed, David's message tone. She paused, Joseph half unwrapped in her hands. Annie, could you read that for me? My glasses. Annie picked up the phone. It says, Mum, conference schedule changed. Can't make Christmas this year. We'll call tomorrow to explain. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. Thank you, dear. Now, would you like to know why Joseph looks worried instead of proud? He does. Annie leaned closer, studying the wooden figure's furrowed brow. George carved him the year Michael was born. He said new fathers should look appropriately concerned. Eleanor placed Joseph next to Mary, adjusting them just so. Each piece tells a story of our family. The shepherds came next, their faces reflecting George's improving skill. These 3 are Michael, Sarah, and David as children. See the smallest one? David insisted he needed glasses, just like his. But where are the sheep? Annie asked, peering into the chest. Ah! Eleanor unwrapped a tissue bundle containing 3 wooden sheep, each marked with a small imperfection. Michael dropped this one the year he left for college. Sarah's sheep lost its ear the Christmas she announced she was moving to Los Angeles. And this one. She touched the 3rd sheep's chipped leg. This was the last piece George carved, the Christmas before he passed. Lightning flashed, followed immediately by window-rattling thunder. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. What about the angel? Annie pointed to the tissue-wrapped figure still in the chest. Eleanor lifted out the final bundle. The angel had always been George's masterpiece, its wings delicately carved, its face bearing a striking resemblance to Eleanor in her youth. A hairline crack ran down one side, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. The angel watches over all the promises we make at Christmas, Eleanor explained, her voice soft. Each year, we'd gather around the nativity on Christmas Eve. Everyone would share their promise for the coming year, and the angel would stand witness. She placed the angel carefully, its broken side turned away from view. The empty manger lay waiting between Mary and Joseph. Where's baby Jesus? Annie asked. He arrives on Christmas Eve, after everyone shares their promises. Eleanor touched the empty space. Or at least, that's how it used to be. Annie was quiet for a moment, studying the scene. What promises did they make? Your children. Eleanor settled into her chair, memories washing over her like the storm's shadows. Would you like to hear about them? The first promises were small, Eleanor began, adjusting the peace candle's light to better illuminate the nativity. Michael promised to practice his trumpet more. Sarah swore she'd stop teasing David about his glasses. David promised to help his father in the workshop. Thunder rolled outside, but Annie seemed transfixed by the wooden figures. Did they keep their promises? Some. Eleanor smiled at the memory. The trumpet lasted until February, but other promises? She touched the shepherd with the tiny glasses. David spent every Saturday in the workshop with his father until he left for college. That's where he learned to love teaching, explaining things to his father while they worked. Lightning illuminated the stained glass window George had installed the year Sarah was born, sending colored shadows dancing across the nativity scene. The promises grew with them, Eleanor continued. The Christmas before medical school, Sarah promised she'd use her gifts to heal others. She's kept that one. Her fingers traced the edge of the shepherd representing her daughter. Though sometimes I think she's forgotten the part about healing herself. Annie leaned closer to examine Michael's shepherd. What about him? Michael? Eleanor's voice caught slightly. The Christmas after his wife left, taking little Tommy with her, he promised he'd become successful enough to win them back. He certainly succeeded at the first part. The lights flickered again as another thunderclap shook the house. Eleanor reached for the emergency flashlight, setting it nearby. The hardest promises, she continued, were the ones made the Christmas after George passed. David promised he'd finish his PhD, because his father had been so proud of his academic achievements. Sarah promised she'd excel in her residency. Michael promised he'd make the family name respected in business circles. But what about promises to you? Annie asked with a child's directness. Eleanor's hand went to the angel's crack, feeling its familiar ridge. There was a Christmas not too long ago, when they promised they'd always come home for the holidays. The angel fell that night. That's how it got cracked. Perhaps it was trying to tell us something. She reached into the chest one last time, withdrawing a small tissue-wrapped bundle that held the infant Jesus carving. Unlike the other pieces, its wood remained bright, preserved in its wrapping since last Christmas. George carved this the year we were married. It was the first piece he ever made that he felt truly proud of. Eleanor kept it cradled in the tissue. He said a promise isn't really a promise, unless it costs you something to keep it. That's why we wait until Christmas Eve, to be sure we're promising things worth sacrificing for. Annie's eyes moved from the empty manger to the phone on the side table. But if no one's coming, then perhaps it's time for new promises. Eleanor carefully rewrapped the Christ child. Would you like to help me write tonight's entry in the Golden Book? I think we have quite a story to tell. The storm's intensity grew, wind howling through Salem's historic streets. Eleanor could barely make out the Thompson house through the curtain of snow. Mum's really late, Annie whispered, worry creeping into her voice. Eleanor studied the nativity scene. Mary and Joseph's eternal vigilance, the shepherd's frozen journeys, the angel's hidden crack, and the empty space waiting to be filled. Then we'll keep the light burning until she comes. That's what the Matthews family has always done. She reached for the Golden Book, its pages still waiting for this year's entry. Shall we write about how you learned to make candles today? About becoming part of the story? Annie nodded, but her eyes kept returning to the empty manger. Mrs. Matthews, can we make a promise too? Even if it's not Christmas Eve yet? Of course, dear. What would you like to promise? That no one should be alone at Christmas. Eleanor felt something shift in her heart, like a door long rusted suddenly creaking open. That, she said softly, is a promise worth keeping. Outside, the storm raged on, but in the living room, the hope and peace candles burned steady, casting their light on faces old and young, on promises broken and newly made. December 1st, 2023, late night. The hospital's emergency text alert lit up Eleanor's phone just as the power finally failed. Through the darkness, she could see Annie's face illuminated by the two candles they'd made together. That's from Mum, Annie said, peering at the screen. She can't leave because of the storm. The roads are closed. Eleanor rose slowly, her joints protesting the cold that had crept in with the power failure. Then it seems we're having a sleepover. She smiled at Annie's worried expression. Your mother knows you're safe here, and we have plenty of candles. They had just settled blankets on the couch when Eleanor's phone rang again. The screen showed Sarah's face, her Christmas photo from last year, wearing surgical scrubs and a Santa hat. Mum? Sarah's voice crackled with static. I've been thinking about Christmas and maybe I could. The line went dead. Eleanor stared at the silent phone, heart suspended between hope and experience. When it rang again moments later, she answered quickly. Sarah? Mrs. Matthews? A different voice altogether. Lisa Thompson, Annie's mother. I'm so sorry about Annie. They've declared a state of emergency, and… She's perfectly safe, Eleanor assured her. We've been making candles and sharing stories. Candles? Lisa's voice softened with memory. I remember those from Sunday school. You taught us how each layer had a meaning. Thunder crashed overhead, and the connection crackled. Mum, Annie called out. Tell her about the special candle. Special candle? Lisa asked. Eleanor glanced at the peace candle, Annie's first attempt at the family craft. Its shape was slightly uneven, but its flame burned true. "Your daughter has quite a talent for—" The line went dead again. Annie's face fell. "Do you think she's worried?" "I think," Eleanor said carefully, settling back into George's chair, "that she knows exactly where you are and that you're safe. Now, would you like to hear about the year your mother made her first candle? She was just about your age." The storm shadows danced across the walls as Eleanor shared stories of Sunday school Christmas pageants, of Lisa Thompson as a shepherd with a tinsel halo, of community traditions long faded into memory. She was midway through describing the Christmas cantata of 1995 when her phone lit up with a text from Michael. "Mum, Tommy asked about your candles today. Remember teaching him that Christmas? Thinking of you. Flight still grounded in Seattle." Eleanor showed Annie the message. "That's my grandson. He's 10 now. I haven't seen him since last Christmas." "Why don't they visit more?" Annie asked, the question hanging in the candlelit darkness. Before Eleanor could answer, a sharp pain shot through her chest. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly until it passed, grateful for the dim light that hid her expression. "Sometimes," she finally said, "people forget that time is the most precious gift we can give each other." She touched the peace candle's base. "That's why we take so long to make these, to remind us that the most meaningful things can't be rushed." Annie was quiet for a moment, watching the flames. "Mrs. Matthews, could we make the joy candle tonight too, so your children will have all their special lights when they come home?" Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "When they come home? Well," Annie said with a child's simple certainty, "they can't miss Christmas. That's when baby Jesus goes in the manger. And you said yourself, the angel watches over all the promises." Another text lit up the phone from David this time. "Mum, marking finals. Found an old Christmas pageant photo in my desk. Remember when I lost my shepherd's staff? Thinking maybe the conference." The message ended there, unsent or incomplete. Eleanor looked at the two burning candles, at the nativity scene waiting in darkness, at the golden book still open to its unfinished entry. Sometimes, she thought, hope came in unexpected packages, in uneven candles made by small hands, in half-finished messages from distant children, in the simple faith of a child who believed in promises. "Yes," she said finally, rising carefully. "Let's make the joy candle. The storm may have trapped us here, but perhaps that's exactly where we need to be." The SeaTac airport terminal gleamed with commercial Christmas cheer, metallic garlands, pre-lit trees, and Muzak carols creating a sanitized version of the season. Michael Matthews stood at the window, watching another plane get de-iced, his reflection ghosted against the darkening sky. Flight 2467 to Boston Logan has been cancelled due to severe weather conditions, the announcement echoed through the terminal. "Please see the service desk for rebooking options." He didn't move toward the desk. After 3 cancelled flights, he knew the drill. His phone showed another missed call from the office. Probably Jenkins, wanting to review merger documents again. The bonus would be substantial, enough to finally prove to Karen that he could provide the life she and Tommy deserved. A flash of red caught his eye. An elderly woman struggling with her carry-on near the coffee shop. Something about her reminded him of Mum, the way she moved carefully, deliberately. Before he could stop himself, he was walking over. "Let me help you with that," he offered, lifting the bag. "Such a gentleman," she smiled, her accent pure New England. "My Arthur always said you can tell a man's character by how he treats strangers at airports." The coffee shop had 1 table left. Michael found himself sitting across from her, his laptop forgotten in his briefcase. "Salem," she said when he asked where she was headed. "My granddaughter's getting married at the First Baptist Church. You know Salem?" Michael's coffee stopped halfway to his lips. "I grew up there." "Oh?" She rummaged in her purse, producing a weathered photograph. "Then perhaps you know the Matthews family? Eleanor Matthews used to make the most beautiful Christmas candles for the church bazaar." The photograph showed a much younger version of his mother, demonstrating candle making to a group of Sunday school children. Michael recognized himself at age 7, face scrunched in concentration. "She taught me to make them," he heard himself say. "Each layer had a meaning. Hope, peace, joy, love," the woman finished. "I bought one every year until they stopped selling them. Such care in each one. You could tell they were made by hands that understood time is a gift we give to others." His phone buzzed. Jenkins again. Michael silenced it, staring at the photograph. He remembered the workshop smell of beeswax and cedar, his father's patient instructions, his mother's quiet prayers over each layer. "What happened?" the woman asked gently. "To the candles?" "Life," Michael said. "Career. Success." The words felt hollow in the artificial Christmas air. "I haven't made a candle in 20 years?" "Ah," she nodded sagely. We often trade the meaningful for the urgent, don't we? Until one day we look up and can't remember why the urgent seemed so important. The terminal speakers crackled. Attention passengers. All remaining flights to the northeast are cancelled due to Winter Storm Eleanor. Michael's head snapped up. The storm's name hit him like a physical blow. Eleanor, the woman echoed. Like your mother. She stood slowly, gathering her belongings. Perhaps some storms come to stop us in our tracks, make us look at what we're rushing past. She left him sitting there, her coffee cooling untouched, the photograph still on the table between them. Michael picked up his phone, scrolling to his mother's number. The last message he'd sent was about the merger, explaining why he couldn't make it home. He hadn't even asked about the first light ceremony. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Outside, Seattle's rain had turned to snow, rare and insistent, like a message trying to get through. The emergency room at Cedars-Sinai blazed with fluorescent determination against the Los Angeles night. Dr. Sarah Matthews mechanically signed another discharge form, her Santa-themed scrub cap feeling more ironic by the hour. Dr. Matthews? A nurse appeared at her elbow. Room 4 needs immediate attention. Elderly female, possible cardiac event. Sarah's mind flashed to her mother, alone in Salem. She pushed the thought away, replacing it with professional detachment as she entered room 4. The patient looked startlingly like her grandmother, the same silver hair, the same delicate hands now tangled in ECG leads. The chart read, Margaret Wilson, 76. Mrs. Wilson, I'm Dr. Matthews. Can you tell me what brought you here tonight? The candles, Margaret whispered. I was trying to make the Christmas candles, the way my mother taught me. But my hands… She gestured weakly at her left arm. The pain started and I couldn't finish them. Sarah's stethoscope felt cold against her own chest. Candles, hand-dipped beeswax, an old family tradition, my daughter. Margaret's voice caught. She was supposed to learn this year, but she's too busy. Everyone's too busy now. The cardiac monitor beeped steadily as Sarah worked, her hands moving through familiar protocols while her mind drifted to another workshop, another set of careful hands teaching ancient crafts. My mother, Sarah found herself saying, she makes candles too. Makes. The tense confusion felt significant somehow. Does she still teach others? Margaret's eyes were sharp despite her condition. I haven't. Sarah checked the IV line, avoiding those knowing eyes. It's been years since I was home for the first light ceremony. Ah, you're one of Eleanor Matthews' children. At Sarah's startled look, Margaret smiled weakly. Those careful hands of yours, I'd know her teaching anywhere. She showed me once at a church demonstration how to make each layer a prayer. Sarah's pager buzzed, another emergency. But she stood frozen, remembering her mother's voice. The smallest light pushes back darkness. That's why we take our time, layer by layer. Your mother, Margaret said softly. She still makes them alone? The word alone echoed in Sarah's mind, accompanied by the steady beeping of cardiac monitors measuring out precious heartbeats, precious moments. Mrs. Wilson, Sarah said, her professional mask slipping slightly, I need to run some tests, but I'll be back. And would you tell me more about when you met my mother? Outside room 4, Los Angeles continued its plastic-wrapped celebration of the season. But inside, under harsh hospital lights, something real and fragile was taking shape, layer by layer, like a candle being carefully dipped in ancient wisdom. The tests confirmed a mild cardiac event, treatable but warning enough. Sarah found herself returning to room 4 between other cases, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. Tell me about the candles, she said during one such visit, adjusting Margaret's medication. The ones you were making when… 4 candles, Margaret said, her voice stronger now. 1 for each Sunday of Advent. My mother learned from her mother, all the way back to Sweden. Each one had to be perfect, not for looks, but for intention. Sarah checked the monitors, remembering her mother's voice. Perfection isn't in the symmetry, Sarah, but in the love you pour into each layer. My daughter Lauren, Margaret continued, she's a corporate lawyer in New York, always saying she'll come learn the tradition next year. Always too many cases, too many commitments. She smiled sadly. Sound familiar? Sarah sank into the chair beside the bed, her feet aching from 12 hours on duty. How did you know I was Eleanor Matthews' daughter? The church bazaar, years ago. Your mother was demonstrating candle making. You were playing piano. Silent night. She was so proud, watching you while her hands kept working. Said you'd inherited your father's musical gifts and her steady hands. The memory hit Sarah with physical force. The scent of beeswax mixing with pine garlands. Her mother's quiet pride. The way the candlelight had danced across the sheet music. When had she last played? The grand piano in her Brentwood apartment stood silent, more furniture than instrument. "Dr. Matthews?" An intern appeared at the door. "Your sister-in-law's on the phone. Something about your mum?" Sarah's heart stuttered. "Karen?" But she and Michael said it's urgent. In the hallway, Sarah grabbed the phone. "Karen? What's wrong with mum?" "Nothing yet." Michael's ex-wife sounded tired. "But Tommy was asking about her candles today, and I remembered something. That last Christmas before everything. She seemed different. Tired. Did you notice?" Sarah thought back to last Christmas, trying to see past her hurried visit, her constant checking of hospital emails. Had she noticed? Had she taken time to really look? "Karen, I need to call you back." Sarah returned to room 4, where Margaret was drowsing beneath hospital white blankets. On the bedside table, a half-finished text to Lauren glowed. "Mum in hospital. Christmas traditions matter." Sarah touched her mother's number in her phone, then hesitated. What time was it in Salem? The first light ceremony would be long over. Her fingertips remembered the feeling of warm wax, of careful layers built one upon another, time given freely, shaped into something that brought light to others. "Dr. Matthews?" The night nurse appeared. "Mass casualty incoming, multi-car pileup on the 405. Sarah squared her shoulders, doctor mode re-engaging. But as she headed toward the ER, she found herself humming Silent Night, muscle memory from countless practice sessions, while her mother dipped candles, building light layer by patient layer. Sometimes, her mother always said, the most important things can't be rushed. The ER doors opened, bringing chaos and need. But something had shifted in Sarah's carefully ordered world, like wax beginning to soften, ready to be reshaped. Este desenvolvimento leva o capítulo aos 4.2, ou Mickey, ou caracteres planejados, aprofundando tanto o conflito interno de Sarah, quanto as conexões temáticas com as tradições natalinas e familiares. Devo prosseguir para o capítulo 7? The University of Chicago campus lay abandoned to winter darkness, save for a single lit window in the humanities building. Inside his office, Professor David Matthews hunched over a stack of final papers, red pen hovering over yet another undergraduate's attempt to analyze tradition in modern society. His phone buzzed again, another message from the conference organizers in Boston. The winter storm had forced schedule changes. His panel on the decay of American family traditions might need to be moved. The irony wasn't lost on him. He reached for the next paper in the stack and froze. The title page read, "The Price of Progress, When Family Traditions Die," by Jennifer Chen. Something about the phrasing made him uncomfortable. To understand any tradition, he'd lectured just last week, we must examine it objectively, without emotional attachment. Jennifer's paper began, "My grandmother died last Christmas. She was the last person in our family who knew how to make the traditional New Year dumplings. We thought we had time to learn. We were wrong." David pushed back from his desk, his eyes drawn to the small wooden box tucked on his highest shelf. He hadn't opened it in years, but he knew what it contained. His father's smallest woodworking tools, the ones George Matthews had used for detail work on the nativity figures. The loss of a tradition, Jennifer's paper continued, isn't just about losing a practice. It's about losing a connection, a bridge between generations. Once broken, some bridges can't be rebuilt. The office felt suddenly too small, too academic, too far from the scent of cedar and beeswax that had once meant home. David found himself reaching for the wooden box, his fingers remembering its weight before his mind could object. Inside, the tools lay exactly as he'd packed them after the funeral. The small chisel his father had used for the angel's wings, the detail knife that had carved baby Jesus' face, the pencil stub still marked with George Matthews' careful measurements. A sheet of paper fluttered from beneath the tools, his father's handwriting, shaky but determined. For David, because sometimes the most important things must be shaped by hand and heart, not just mind. "Love, Dad." His phone lit up with a text from Sarah. "You thinking about Mum too?" Before he could respond, Jennifer's paper caught his eye again. When the last dumpling maker in our family died, she took with her not just a recipe, but 1,000 Sunday afternoons, 1,000,000 small moments of learning and love that we'll never get back. David picked up his father's detail knife, feeling its wear-smoothed handle. How many Christmas Eves had he watched these tools shape meaning from mere wood? How many chances to learn had he passed up, thinking there would always be more time? His laptop chimed email from the conference organizers. The storm had shut down Boston. All panels cancelled. Outside his window, Chicago's cold pressed against the glass. But in his hands, his father's tools carried the warmth of memory, of lessons he'd been too busy analyzing to actually learn. The next line of Jennifer's paper blurred before his eyes. The greatest tragedy isn't that traditions die, it's that we often don't recognize their value until they're already gone. David reached for his phone, scrolling to his mother's number. The campus clock struck midnight, its deep tones echoing across the empty quad. In Salem, would the workshop light still be burning? Would the candles for this year's ceremony be cooling on their stands, waiting for hands that wouldn't come to light them? His father's tools gleamed in the harsh office light, asking a question he'd spent years studying but never really answering. What makes a tradition worth keeping? The answer, he realized, wasn't in any of the papers before him. It was in the weight of well-used tools, in the patience of hands teaching hands, in the light that could only be built one careful layer at a time. Annie sat cross-legged on Eleanor's living room floor, carefully turning pages of a Matthews family photo album, while the storm rattled the windows. The joy candle they'd made together cast dancing shadows across photographs, spanning 5 decades of Christmases. "Who's singing?" Annie asked, cocking her head at the faint music drifting from upstairs. Eleanor paused in her knitting, another tradition, making Christmas scarves through December nights. "That's the old music box in Sarah's room. Sometimes the storm vibrations set it off." She didn't mention how the melody of Silent Night brought a fresh wave of pain, sharper than her illness. "Can we go look?" Upstairs, Sarah's childhood bedroom remained frozen in time. Medical school acceptance letter framed on the wall, choir medals hanging from a bulletin board, and on the dresser, the carved wooden music box that had played Silent Night every Christmas Eve since Sarah's first piano recital. Eleanor wound the key, letting the familiar notes fill the room. Sarah played this at the Christmas service every year, from age 12 until she left for college. Even when she had the flu, even during that terrible ice storm of '98, her voice trailed off as another kind of storm memory threatened. "What happened in the ice storm?" Annie asked, tracing the music box's carved angels. Eleanor sank into Sarah's old rocking chair, the weight of memories pressing down. "The roads were treacherous. George wanted to cancel the Christmas Eve service, but Sarah insisted. Mum makes her candles no matter what," she said. "I can play through a storm." The music box's melody slowed, growing fainter. She made it through Silent Night perfectly. But afterward, in the parking lot, Eleanor's hands tightened on the chair's arms. George slipped, broke his arm trying to catch himself. "That's when they found the first tumor." Annie's small hand covered Eleanor's. "Is that why they don't come home? Because it makes them sad?" Before Eleanor could answer, her phone lit up with a text from Karen, Michael's ex-wife. "Eleanor, Tommy's asking about the year you taught him to make a candle. Says the angel broke. What happened?" The memory hit hard. Tommy at 7, so careful with the hot wax, so proud of his uneven creation. The angel falling. Michael and Karen arguing in harsh whispers by the tree. Their last Christmas together as a family. Thunder cracked overhead, and the house plunged into total darkness. Annie's hand tightened on Eleanor's. "Don't worry," Eleanor said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I know where every flashlight is in this house. And every shadow, every memory, every moment when her children had started slipping away." But as they made their way carefully downstairs, the joy candle's flame stood steady in the dark, like a small act of defiance against both the storm outside and the ones that had scattered her family to distant cities. The music box's final notes faded upstairs, but its echo lingered, carrying the weight of promises made and broken, of talent given and withdrawn, of a daughter who once played through storms because her mother had taught her that love meant showing up, no matter what. In the candlelight, Eleanor saw Annie studying the nativity scene's angel, its hidden crack a testament to another kind of storm. Sometimes, Eleanor thought, breaks needed to be seen to be healed. Sometimes the most important light was the one that showed us what was broken. She picked up the golden book, its pages waiting. Perhaps it was time to write about storms, about music boxes that played unbidden, about cracks that let the light in. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake a note in winter's own version of Silent Night. A flash of crimson against the snow-laden window startled Eleanor from her writing. A cardinal had landed on the sill, its feathers bright against the storm's whiteness. Her mother's words echoed. "A cardinal in winter is God's messenger, Eleanor. Pay attention." The power remained out, but the 3 candles they'd made, hope, peace and joy, created a warm circle of light. Annie had finally dozed off on the couch, wrapped in the quilt Eleanor's grandmother had made for her wedding. The golden book lay open in Eleanor's lap, its pages recording this unexpected night. Another sharp pain seized her chest, more intense than the last. Eleanor closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing the way the doctor had taught her. When she opened them, the cardinal remained, watching through the glass. Her phone lit up a group text from Karen to all 3 of her children. Found this while cleaning Tommy's room. Thought you should see it. The attachment showed a crumpled essay in a child's handwriting. My Christmas Wish, by Tommy Matthews. I wish my dad and Aunt Sarah and Uncle David would go home for Christmas, because Great-Grandma Eleanor has the same look my goldfish had before it went to heaven. Eleanor's hand trembled, nearly dropping the phone. How had Tommy noticed what his father, aunt and uncle had missed? Children saw truth so clearly sometimes, unblurred by adult complications. The pain returned, stealing her breath. The cardinal tapped the window once, sharp and insistent, then took flight into the storm. Eleanor felt a similar urgency. Time growing short, things still unsaid. She turned to a fresh page in the golden book, her pen moving with newfound purpose. My dearest children, by the time you read this you may finally understand why this Christmas mattered so much. The doctors gave me 3 months. That was 4 months ago. I've beaten their timeline, but I feel the horizon drawing closer. I didn't tell you, because I wanted your last memories of me to be shaped by love, not obligation. But perhaps I've done us all a disservice. Perhaps some truths need to be spoken, while there's still time for them to change us. Michael, my practical one, always trying to prove your worth through success. You were worth everything the moment you took your first breath. Sarah, my healer, so afraid of emotional pain that you armor yourself in professional distance. Some wounds need to be felt to be healed. David, my scholar, analyzing tradition instead of living it. Some wisdom can't be found in books. I'm writing this by candlelight, watching a child sleep beneath your grandmother's quilt, and I realize, maybe this storm is a gift. Maybe sometimes we need darkness to see what really matters. The cardinal that just visited reminded me of something Mum used to say. Messages come in red feathers and winter storms, in midnight pains and children's truths. The question is whether we're wise enough to hear them. I don't know if you'll make it home for Christmas. I don't know if I'll see another spring, but I know this. Love, like these candles we make, must be built layer by layer, with patience and presence. No shortcut, no substitute, no rushing what needs time to form. The workshop waits. The wax is ready. The molds your father made still hold their shape, waiting for hands to remember their purpose. Whatever comes next, know that you were my best creation, my deepest joy, The pain struck again, sharper than before. The pen slipped from Eleanor's grasp, drawing a thin dark line across the unfinished page. Annie stirred on the couch. Mrs. Matthews, are you okay? Eleanor forced a smile, but the cardinal's warning echoed in her mind. Sometimes messages came in red feathers and winter storms. Sometimes time ran out before we were ready. The 3 candles flickered, casting long shadows across the golden book's bleeding ink. Michael stood at the SeaTac Airport customer service desk, his corporate credit card ready. I don't care about the storm. There must be some way to get to Boston. The agent shook her head. All flights are grounded until further notice. Winter Storm Eleanor has shut down every major airport from Chicago east. That name again. Michael gripped the counter. Private flights? Charter services? Sir? The FAA has suspended. His phone buzzed. Karen's group text with Tommy's essay. The words hit him like physical blows. The same look my goldfish had before it went to heaven. Across the terminal, a group of stranded travelers had gathered around an elderly man with a guitar, singing Christmas carols. Silent night drifted over the airport's chaos, and suddenly Michael was 7 again, watching his mother's hands dip candles while Sarah practiced at the piano. His corporate card felt heavy in his hand. Success. Security. The promises he'd made to himself after losing Karen and Tommy. But his son's words burned in his mind. Some things couldn't be brought back. Sir? The agent was waiting. Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts he hadn't used in years. He found the number he needed. Jake Reynolds, his old Salem High teammate, now running his family's private aviation company out of Seattle. Jake? It's Michael Matthews. I need a favor. A big one. In Los Angeles, Sarah stared at Tommy's essay on her phone, then at the sleeping form of Margaret Wilson in room 4. The cardiac monitors beeped steadily, measuring out precious heartbeats. Her supervisor appeared at the door. Dr. Matthews? About your holiday shift coverage. I need to go home, Sarah said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. It's not a request. In his Chicago office, David read Tommy's words again, then looked at his father's woodworking tools. His conference presentation on the decay of American family traditions felt suddenly hollow. His office phone rang, Michael's number. "They're grounding all flights," Michael said without preamble. "But I've got a lead on private transport. You're closest. Can you drive?" David glanced at the storm warnings on his computer. 15 hours to Salem in good weather. This wasn't good weather. "The roads are treacherous," he said. "Since when did that stop a Matthews?" Michael's voice caught. "Remember the ice storm of '98? When Sarah played through it because Mum makes her candles no matter what. In Salem, Eleanor's pain subsided enough for her to check her phone. 3 missed calls, 1 from each of her children. A text from Michael. "Hold on, Mum, just hold on." Annie stirred on the couch. "The storm's getting worse." "Yes," Eleanor said softly, watching the 3 candles burn. "But sometimes, the darkest night is when we find our way home." In Seattle, Michael hung up with Jake and immediately dialed Sarah. "I've got a plane. Small, probably rough, but it'll fly. Can you get to Seattle?" In Los Angeles, Sarah was already moving. "I'll find a way. Did you reach David?" "He's driving." "Sarah," Michael paused. "Tommy's essay. Do you think?" "Annulsa?" Her voice was tight. "I just got off with Karen. There's more she didn't share in the group text. Mum's been seeing oncologists." The word hung between them like a sword. In Chicago, David threw essential items into a bag, his father's tools carefully wrapped in soft cloth. The campus clock struck midnight as he headed for his car. 3 siblings, 3 cities, 1 storm-laden night. The journey home had begun. In Salem, Eleanor added one last line to her unfinished letter. "Time is a gift we often understand too late, but sometimes, if we're blessed, we get one last chance to make it right." The 3 candles burned steady, lighting the way through the darkest hours before dawn. Jake Reynolds' Cessna Citation bucked against the wind as it climbed through Seattle's storm clouds. Michael sat rigid in the co-pilot's seat, his knuckles white on the armrest. "Better hold tight," Jake shouted over the engine noise. "Storm's even worse up here." He glanced at his old friend. "Must be important to risk flying in this." Michael pulled out his phone, showing Jake the photograph the elderly woman had left at the airport. His mother teaching candle making, his younger self watching in wonder. "Some things," Michael said, "are worth the risk." The plane rattled violently. Jake checked his instruments, face grim. "Eleanor taught my kids in Sunday school. Best Christmas pageant director Salem ever had." He paused. "Heard she hasn't been well?" Michael's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "My sister's a nurse at Salem General. She didn't say much, but..." Jake focused on navigating through another turbulent patch. "Sometimes we think we have more time than we do." Beyangs blank, underscore, blank. On Interstate 80, David's car crept through near whiteout conditions. His father's tools rode shotgun, wrapped in the same cloth that had covered the nativity pieces each year. The radio crackled with emergency warnings and Christmas music in equal measure. His phone rang through the car's speakers. "Sarah." "Where are you?" she asked without preamble. "Just past Toledo. Roads are getting worse." He squinted through the windshield. "You?" "LAX to Seattle. Meeting Michael's crazy charter plan." "David." She hesitated. "I just spoke with my colleague at Salem General. Pulled some strings, checked Mum's records." David's hands tightened on the wheel. "How bad?" "Stage 4. Pancreatic. She's been hiding it for months." Sarah's doctor voice cracked. "The fact she's still..." She couldn't finish. David thought of Jennifer Chen's essay about lost traditions, lost time. "Keep talking to me, Sarah. Tell me about the last time you played Silent Night for her." Bayway Bega, blank, underscore, blank. In Salem, Eleanor's pain had become a constant companion. Annie slept fitfully on the couch, while Eleanor tried to focus on her breathing, on the steady flames of the 3 candles, on anything but the growing certainty that she might not see another sunrise. Her phone lit up a video call from Tommy. "Great, Grandma!" His face filled the screen, sleep-tousled but urgent. "Mom said I should show you something." He held up a crudely made candle, lumpy and imperfect. "I found it in my memory box, the one we made together, before." He trailed off, then brightened. "Dad's coming home to you, did you know?" Eleanor touched the screen gently. "Is he, sweetheart?" "Mom says there's a big storm named after you. Isn't that cool? Like magic or something." "Like magic or something." Eleanor looked at the 3 candles burning despite the darkness, despite the storm that shared her name. "Tommy," she said softly, "would you like to learn the prayer we say when making candles? The one about light finding its way home?" Blank, underscore blank. Sarah's plane touched down in Seattle just as Michael and Jake were completing their pre-flight checks. "This is insane," she said, climbing aboard. "Learn from the best," Michael replied. "Who else would make candles through every storm?" Jake's radio crackled. "Last chance to abort. Storms intensifying over New England." Michael and Sarah exchanged looks. Years of carefully constructed adult lives, careers, achievements, reasonable decisions, all falling away in the face of a simple truth. Their mother had lit the way home through every storm of their lives. Now it was their turn. "Take off," Michael said. The small plane lifted into the darkness, carrying its precious cargo east, racing the dawn, racing time itself. In Salem, Eleanor added 3 drops of cedar oil to the melted wax, preparing for what might be her final candle. The love candle waited to be made, as it had every Christmas since 1969. "This one," she told Annie's sleeping form, "we make last, because love endures after all other lights fade." Outside, Winter Storm Eleanor raged on, its wind singing an ancient song about children finding their way home through darkness. The pain was becoming unbearable, but Eleanor kept her hands steady as she guided Annie through the preparation of the love candle's wax. "Why does this one smell different?" Annie asked, now wide awake despite the late hour. "Because love has its own essence," Eleanor managed, fighting another wave of discomfort. "Rose oil amber, and something special. The first perfume George gave me when we were courting." The basement workshop glowed with candlelight, their previous 3 creations providing just enough illumination to work. The old copper pot hummed softly as the wax melted, releasing memories with its fragrance. Eleanor's phone buzzed continuously now, Sarah investigating her medical records, Michael coordinating with Jake's small plane, David marking his progress through the storm. She let the messages accumulate unanswered. Some moments needed undivided attention. "The love candle is different," Eleanor explained, measuring the oils with shaking hands. "We make it last because it needs to burn the longest. It stays lit from Christmas Eve until the New Year, guiding loved ones home through the darkest nights." Annie watched the wax temperature carefully, just as Eleanor had taught her. "Like now? Guiding your children home?" A particularly sharp pain made Eleanor grasp the workbench, Annie noticed. "Should I call my mum at the hospital?" "No, dear. Just help me with this candle. It needs to be finished." Eleanor straightened with effort. Sometimes love means completing what you've started, no matter how difficult. As they worked, Eleanor found herself sharing stories she'd never told her own children. About the night George carved the angel with trembling hands after his diagnosis, about the Christmas she'd made candles from her hospital bed after Sarah was born, about the last love candle she and George made together. The storm's fury increased above them, but in the workshop, time moved to the rhythm of dipping wax and sharing wisdom. Eleanor felt her strength ebbing with each layer, even as the candle grew stronger. "Annie," she said softly, "if I need to rest before we finish, I'll keep going, just like you showed me, layer by layer, prayer by prayer." Eleanor smiled through her pain. How strange that this child, this unexpected gift of the storm, would ensure the tradition continued, even if her phone lit up with an urgent message from Sarah. "Mum, I know about the cancer. We're coming home. Hold on, please just hold on." The love candle grew between them, each layer a testimony to something stronger than storm or sickness or separation. Above, the wind howled her name through Salem's streets, as if calling her children home. 3 a.m. December 2nd. The Matthews Victorian creaked under the storm's assault, as Eleanor and Annie carried the completed love candle upstairs. Eleanor had to pause every few steps, the pain now a constant companion. "Just a little further," Annie encouraged, supporting the candle with small, determined hands. The angels waiting. In the living room, all 4 candles now stood assembled for the first time since 1969, without Eleanor's children present. Hope, peace, joy, and finally, love, each marking a cardinal direction on the antique table, surrounding the nativity scene. Eleanor reached for the angel with trembling hands. "Every year we place the angel last. After all the candles are lit, it watches over our—" Her voice caught as pain seared through her chest, causing her grip to falter. The angel slipped. Annie lunged forward, but wasn't fast enough. The porcelain figure struck the table's edge, its crack from years ago splitting completely. The angel broke in 2, the separation clean and decisive. "Oh no," Annie whispered, tears welling. "I'm sorry, I couldn't catch it." Eleanor sank into George's chair, one hand pressed to her chest. "Perhaps," she managed between labored breaths, "it's trying to tell us something again." Her phone burst to life. Michael's number. "Mum?" His voice crackled with static and engine noise. "We're in Jake's plane, about an hour out. The storm's... It's bad, but we're coming." "Michael," Eleanor said softly, "the angel broke." A long pause. Like when Tommy, that last Christmas before, completely this time, no hiding the crack. She could hear Sarah in the background, arguing with someone about landing permissions. David's texts were coming rapid fire. His location updates, his speed, his estimated arrival time. The pain intensified. Eleanor looked at the broken angel, at the 4 candles standing witness, at Annie's worried face in the candlelight. "Michael," she whispered, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told all of you months ago." But darkness was creeping at the edges of her vision. The phone slipped from her grasp as she slumped in the chair. "Mrs. Matthews?" Annie's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Mrs. Matthews!" The last thing Eleanor saw before consciousness faded was the love candle's flame, burning steady and true, even as its creator's light began to dim. The broken angel lay in pieces on the table, its hidden truth finally exposed, just as the storm that bore its maker's name reached its full fury over Salem. 4 a.m., December 2nd. Annie Thompson had never called 911 before, but her mother's nursing training kicked in through her terror. Elderly woman, unresponsive, difficulty breathing before she passed out, she reported, keeping her fingers pressed to Eleanor's wrist the way her mum had taught her, counting the weak but present pulse. The dispatcher's voice remained calm. "Ambulance is trying to reach you, but the storm is making roads nearly impassable." The 4 candles cast wild shadows as wind battered the Victorian's windows. Annie kept her other hand tight in Eleanor's. "Please don't go," she whispered. "They're almost home. Your children are almost home." Eleanor's phone buzzed continuously on the floor. Michael and Sarah's plane attempting an emergency landing at Salem Regional. David's car fighting through the final stretch of storm-laden highways. Karen mobilizing every medical contact she had in Massachusetts. The broken angel lay in pieces between the candles, its separation revealing something no one had noticed before. A small hollow inside, containing a yellowed envelope. Annie carefully extracted it, recognizing Eleanor's handwriting. "To my children when the angel breaks again." A pounding at the front door startled her. Through the glass, she saw her mother's snow-covered form. Lisa Thompson burst in, still in hospital scrubs. "Annie, the whole emergency room's been trying to..." She stopped short at the scene before her. "Oh, Eleanor." Lisa's medical training took over immediately. She checked vitals, made calls, held her daughter close while they waited for help that was fighting through a storm to reach them. "Mum," Annie whispered, showing her the envelope. "Should we?" A new sound cut through the storm, helicopter blades. Lisa rushed to the window. Life flight. They must have gotten clearance despite the weather. Almost simultaneously, headlights cut through the swirling snow as a car skidded to a stop outside. David Matthews practically fell through the front door, his father's toolbox clutched to his chest. "Mum!" His voice broke at the sight of Eleanor unconscious in George's chair. The helicopter's noise grew deafening. Through the windows, they could see it attempting to land in the church parking lot across the street. Minutes later, Sarah burst in, still in surgical scrubs, medical bag in hand. Michael was right behind her, carrying equipment from Jake's plane. The Matthews children converged on their mother's still form, just as Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. "The angel," she whispered. "Read the letter." Sarah was already setting up emergency medical equipment, her doctor's hands steady, even as tears fell. David cradled their mother's hand while Michael, hands shaking, opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, written in Eleanor's careful script. "My dearest ones, if you're reading this, the angel has broken again, and with it, perhaps, our final illusion that time is endless. The first break warned us. This one comes to teach us. You see, I never told you the whole truth about these angels. Your father didn't make just one. He made dozens over the years, practicing until he felt worthy of making our family's guardian. Each broken attempt taught him something about patience, about acceptance, about love. The angel, you know, the one that's now broken beyond hiding, was actually his last creation, finished just before his death. He knew it wasn't perfect. That's why he loved it most. Eleanor, he told me, let them see the crack. Perfect things don't need love. Broken things teach us how to give it. I've watched this angel stand guard over our family's promises for decades. Perhaps now it's broken to show us that some things must break completely before they can be remade. My time is short. The doctors made that clear months ago. But love doesn't end with earthly light. It burns on in traditions passed down, in skills taught with patience, in memories shaped by time and care. The candles will burn as they always have. The traditions will continue, changed perhaps but unbroken in their essence. And this angel, like our family, will be stronger for having been broken and remade with love. All my love, Mum. The letter trembled in Michael's hands as emergency medical personnel finally arrived, fighting through the storm that bore his mother's name to help the woman who had always lit the way home. Christmas Eve, 2024. The Matthews Victorian glowed with warmth against the winter twilight. Through the front windows, passers-by could see 4 generations gathered around the antique table, where 4 special candles burned. Eleanor Matthews sat in her restored place of honor in George's chair, thinner than last year but very much alive. A miracle, her doctors called it. Modern medicine and experimental treatment had played their part, but Eleanor knew better. Some lights refused to go out until their purpose was fulfilled. Michael stood behind her, Tommy pressed close to his side. He'd relocated his consulting business to Boston, buying the old Henderson house just 2 streets over. Karen had followed with Tommy, their relationship healing slowly, layer by layer, like a candle being carefully crafted. Sarah sat at the piano, her surgical schedule now arranged to protect family traditions. She'd started teaching piano to local children on weekends, each lesson ending with a story about the Matthews family candles. David had taken a position at Salem State University, his father's tools finding new purpose as he learned woodcarving between lectures. The nativity scene now included new figures he'd made, watching over the original set like guardian angels. Annie Thompson, now 9, sat cross-legged by Eleanor's feet, carefully recording the evening's events in the Golden Book. She'd become the unofficial apprentice keeper of Matthew's traditions, her small hands learning to make candles with the same patience that had guided generations before her. The angel stood whole again atop the nativity, its break now mended with gold in the Japanese kintsugi tradition. David's suggestion, making the repair part of its beauty rather than something to hide. "It's time," Eleanor said softly, picking up the Christ-child figure. Every movement was still measured, careful, but her hands remained steady for the important things. One by one, they shared their promises for the coming year. Not grand declarations of success or achievement, but simple commitments to presence, to patience, to the kind of love that builds slowly and burns long. Michael promised regular Sunday dinners. Sarah vowed to play more music, to heal with art as well as science. David committed to teaching Tommy woodcarving, passing on his grandfather's legacy. Annie promised to keep learning the old ways, to be ready when her time came to carry the light forward. Eleanor placed the Christ child in the manger, completing the scene that had watched over 55 years of Matthew's family Christmases. The 4 candles burned steady. Hope, peace, joy and love, their light reflecting off the angel's golden scars. "Remember," Eleanor told them, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom hard-won. "Perfect things don't need love. Broken things teach us how to give it." Outside, snow began to fall softly over Salem, but inside the old Victorian, light kept the darkness at bay. Not just from candles, but from the kind of love that breaks us open to remake us whole, that calls us home through storms, that teaches us how traditions don't just preserve the past but light the way forward. The Golden Book lay open to its newest page, Annie's careful handwriting continuing the story that Eleanor had started so many years ago. The last line read, "And so the light passes on, not dimmed by time but strengthened by love, burning ever brighter in the hearts of those who keep it." Eleanor looked at her family gathered close, at the traditions renewed and transformed, at the light that would burn on long after her own flame flickered out. Some endings, she knew now, were really just new ways of beginning. The angel watched over them all, its golden scars glowing in the candlelight, beautiful not despite its breaks but because of them. Epilogue. The 5th light. Christmas morning, 2024. Dawn broke over Salem, painting the fresh snow in shades of rose and gold. In the Matthews workshop, Annie carefully lifted a new candle from its final dipping. A smaller one, but crafted with the same care as its larger companions upstairs. Eleanor watched from her chair, directing with soft words rather than hands now. "That's it. Perfect." "Not perfect," Annie corrected with a smile. "Just made with love." The new candle would be the first of its kind. The Apprentice Light, Eleanor had named it. A tradition reimagined for a new generation. Upstairs, the house stirred to life. The scent of Sarah's cinnamon rolls mingled with coffee and pine. Michael and Tommy's voices drifted down as they prepared for church. David could be heard in his workshop, putting finishing touches on next year's Nativity edition. "You know," Eleanor said, watching Annie wrap the new candle in silk, "traditions aren't meant to be preserved in amber. They're meant to grow, to change, to light new paths while honoring old ones." Annie nodded, understanding beyond her years. "Like the angel's golden scars." "Exactly like that." Together, They climbed the stairs to join the family. The 4 traditional candles still burned in their centuries-old formation. Annie placed the 5th, smaller candle in their midst, a new light for a new chapter. Karen, setting the breakfast table, paused to watch. Lisa Thompson, now as much a part of these gatherings as anyone, smiled from the kitchen doorway. "To new light," Eleanor said softly, touching the flame of her last candle to Annie's first. The small flame caught, steady and bright, like hope passing from one generation to the next. Outside, a cardinal landed on the snowy windowsill, its red feathers bright against the winter white. Eleanor smiled, remembering her mother's words about messages and messengers. Some traditions never died, they just waited for new hands to carry their light forward. "Well," Eleanor said, opening the golden book to a fresh page, "shall we begin?" The end. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of your own family traditions, please take a moment to like this video and share what Christmas means to you in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your special holiday traditions or a moment when love brought your family back together. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories for more stories that celebrate the power of family, faith, and forgiveness. Remember, like Eleanor's candles, the most beautiful lights are the ones we keep burning for those we love.